Well, maybe I'll tell you. They asked me to speak at a missions conference for this church about home missions, and it was a mega church, and everybody sat like a quarter mile away, way in the back. And so I was asking them, I won't make you come down, but I was asking them, like, hey, just come down a little closer so we can talk. And nobody would move, like, at all. And it was probably 20 rows before there was anybody. So to me, it was very awkward. So I had to go, look, if you're afraid to come up and sit next to me, this whole missions conference thing is not going to go very well. So, but it's okay. How was lunch? You got some energy? Can we keep going? All right, so we're going to do a little more Q&A format. You can interrupt me at any time and ask a question. You can even argue with me. That would probably keep us all awake more if you do that. But I wanted to frame out a little bit more of this idea of building kingdom ecosystems a little bit. Quite a few of you had a lot of questions about what we're doing locally as a picture of church and kingdom building. So I wanted to kind of outline that a little bit. But before I do that, any kind of weird questions or thoughts you had from the first session that you just went, I got to ask that before we get going? Anybody? Apparently my talk was so clear, concise. Okay. We're moving on then. Okay, there we go. She saved the personal, kind of a personal question, she says. All right.
But you just mentioned the hardest part of going with Jesus is leaving, and I was just telling you that I've been kind of dealing with in my own life because my husband's from Iowa, I'm from Ohio, and I felt like we were supposed to come here, but still feel like it's not home. Is that, do you deal with that, or is because you felt like he's leading you there, Denver's not a call anymore?
No. Okay, well, she was asking about the pain of when you actually do have to leave and move to a different area. Do you feel better after you get there? No, every day I miss something about Denver, but I think it still is when you know you're sent and if you question your call 10 years in, then I think it could get rough. But we've had such amazing, weird stories happen since we showed up. I feel like that's what the Lord knew he needed to give me. My wife was happy from the first minute we stepped ground. She loved it. She would actually say to this day she likes the Midwest. I don't understand. She loves the green and she liked the humidity. She just, but I was struggling. But again, each week it was wow, I can't believe that happened. When we got the building donated, before I even said yes, and again, I kind of want to share this part of it with you because a part of building the ecosystem is to live by a different economy financially. The way that we've done church the last 60, 80 years, there's actually a business model tied to that that's based on having people give money, consolidate money, and then that pays for usually the staff of the church and then whatever external missions or projects the church has, right? Nothing wrong with that. It's not non-biblical or anything like that. But that business model only works when the church is growing and impacting, right? So when the church is declining, that financial business model doesn't work anymore. And so that's why most denominations, as they're failing, the middle management goes, so the denominational leaders out in the field go, and then the Bible colleges and the seminaries begin to struggle, and eventually it goes away because the financial model is that it's based on consumerism. We provide something, and then they pay for those services. So when that process isn't working, you actually have to develop a different economy. I think Jesus set up an economy, what we would refer to as a manna. Remember manna? There's one time where it says you cannot serve both God and mammon, right? Mammon was specifically the currency that's tied to the Romans. And that money was used to coerce and control people. So there was a lot of fear related to money. So Jesus was saying, if you're afraid of losing money or gaining money or or trying to do whatever you have to do to get money, you probably won't be able to go where I'm going. And the alternative to that is manna. What we learn, way back in the Old Testament, is that God just provides daily, and your job is to spend it, steward it, not hoard it, not save up, not figure out retirement, but give it out, right? And then don't worry, I'll throw it down the next morning. So when you see the kingdom economy begin to happen, it begins to unlock your idea of what it means to be in the church and what to do with our consolidated money, the whole thing. So that's directly tied to this story. When we got the building, we walked around, and it had been boarded up for 60 years. And so it just needed to be rebuilt. And there was one gentleman from Iowa. So, good things do come from Iowa, okay? And amen. From 4 of you, the rest of you on the Illinois side. But this is a gentleman that I had coached a little network out in the cornfields of Sioux Center, Iowa. My daughters ended up going to Northwestern in Orange City. So actually, it's crazy that I have Iowa roots, and it's still hard to say. I don't. But anyway, Al he kind of became the grandpa and grandmother, Al and Carol, for my daughters while they were in college, all because they had read Tangible Kingdom, and they had brought me out to speak to the townspeople, as he called it. And I led to faith this famous kind of homeless alcoholic dude that everybody knew in town, and he came to faith during lunchtime during my seminar. And the word got out, and it started a little movement, and they planted the largest church in the county using the TK primer thing that we were using. So I kept going out to Iowa to coach this network. So then he and Carol became grandpa and grandma when my daughters ended up out in college there. Well, when we moved to Alton, Al and Carol were very close to us. I said, hey, when you figure out what the Lord wants you to do in that town, we would like to help financially. So, and I had kind of forgotten about it, but when we got out there and I got the building handed to me, I just thought, I don't think we can do this unless we have some crazy economy begin to happen. So I called Al and I said, hey, Al, and I'm still wanting to go back to Denver when I called Al. So I said, Al, I know, you said when we figure out what we're supposed to do that you wanted me to call you. So I'm doing that out of obedience, but I know as some time has passed, I'm actually trying to talk him out of giving me money. I know a lot of time has passed, and you guys give to tons of great stuff, so I don't want you to feel any pressure to give to this. It's kind of a weird deal, but the guy's trying to give me a building, and Al yells over the phone, take it. I'm like, what do you mean, take it, Al? Have you seen it? Like, it's huge. I'll send you. So I sent him a picture. He's like, take it, whatever it is, take it. I said, well, Al, it's going to take a lot to, turn this thing. And I said, again, Al, you give to a lot of, I'm still trying to talk him out of it because I want to go back to Denver. I want this whole bad dream to go away. And Al goes, no, he goes, I'm in. I'm still in. Like, how much you think you're going to need? And I said, I think it's going to be at least $500,000 to fix this thing. And so he goes, I'm in for $300,000, like over the phone. So I've never raised money like this. Like, okay, so don't think, okay, this is normal for Hugh. This is not normal for me. I said, okay, Al, I think I even said shoot. That's a lot, Al. And I said, well, that'll get me leaning into it. I said, I'll let you know if I feel like we're supposed to take this building. And the next day I had to fly out to San Francisco to speak at a men's retreat. I didn't know any of these guys, kind of a wealthy Presbyterian church who just hired me. So I flew out to San Fran, did the talk. And during the talk, I was telling these guys about the family mission to Alton. And it came up in the talk that, and I even told them, I'm thinking about this building, like trying to do something for the town. And at the end of one of the talks, a gentleman came up and he said, can I fly you back in a few weeks? I think I have some friends that might want to help you with that vision. So I said, sure. So I flew in just for a dinner back to San Fran. And about 6 gentlemen wrote me checks just while we were having steak dinner, and it was about $150,000. I actually told them I haven't really taken the building yet. But I said, I'll take the checks back, and if we don't do it, I'll send them back to you guys. So like, cool. So I get on the plane with $150,000 in checks and $300,000 kind of committed over the phone. So I'm doing the math. I'm like, I don't know. But I'm thinking, it's weird. It's almost like God is forcing us to do what He wants to do, which is an interesting thought, because most of the time in ministry, we try to think of good things we should do for God. I don't know if many of us still believe that God has very specific things that He likes to do. And so imagine me kind of I'd say in the church planting world, I feel like I could plant a church anywhere. I feel like we've learned the skills and there's some natural aptitude. And so going into Alton, if I had just said, well, let's just plant a church here, I think we probably could have done that. But as I'm walking and praying and asking the Lord, believing that He still is very real and has been in Alton way before I got there, right? And will be there way after I'm over, that I started to pray, God, do you know what would unlock this town? So we only want to do what you want to do. And so then the fact that He then pushed us towards that building, it starts to make you think differently about the innovation of the Lord. Remember when you read in Scripture, again, try to look through the trees a little bit. When He talks about wine and wineskin, remember that? He said you can't put new wine. New wine always represented what we call the apostolic missional push of the church. Whenever new things have to begin, it creates a different tasting wine. And you can't put that wine in the old structures. Okay? And for, most of the consulting I do is within existing structures, trying to get some of that new wine, because they realize they're out of wine, right? They want this new apostolic movement, but they don't want to change anything of the structure. Jesus in that story, remember, He shares that He loves all the wineskins. He's not against any. He doesn't even want the old wineskin to blow up. Jesus would not come into any existing church and go, you just ought to scrap the thing. But Jesus knows there's a natural life cycle in what we call an apostolic movement. That word's a little bit weird. We didn't talk about it for many, many years in the church. But we say the Apostle Paul all the time, right? So not weird to talk to him, like he was the apostle, but all the giftings that you and I hear about, the apostle, the pastor, the teacher, the evangelist, the shepherd, they're all mentioned in the book of Ephesians, chapter 4. And it's what many are now calling the APEST typology, APEST, A-P-E-S-T. And if you read that scripture, it kind of unlocks a lot of things if you see it differently. It's almost like you need another pair of glasses, because traditionally in the church, we've seen church based on leadership. Usually what we call a single leader model of church, where there's a senior pastor and then a few staff, and then they sort of chaplain the existing congregation. And therefore, you see how the money flows, okay? Again, nothing wrong with that paradigm. But it's based on what we call a shepherd-teacher orientation, okay? So most of our training for ministry, seminary, Bible school, was for what letters of that paradigm? We'll just put apostolic, prophetic, evangelist, shepherd, and teacher. What's most of our ministry training generally for? Yeah, it's usually for what we call the STs. So almost all of your training, because it was assumed when we set up seminaries and training centers that all you really needed to do was to teach people how to hermeneutics, homiletics, church structures, because the assumption was there will always be people in the building. So these are the only two leadership skills that are going to be needed. In St. Louis area, it's the largest amount of Lutheran churches anywhere in America other than Lutherville, out in wherever that's from. And I was speaking to their national leadership, and the president actually said in front of everybody, he said, none of us needed to even think about this missiology stuff, because during the 40s through the 70s, we could not build churches fast enough. Whatever we built filled up, and we could not get seminary students out of the seminaries fast enough. So he said all we needed was the STs. But when you begin to look at that passage in Ephesians 4, it says that God has given the church, he's talking about the leadership or the influencing gifts, the apostle, the prophet, the evangelist, the shepherd, and teacher. It says, if you kind of play it out, do you remember the word? For the blanking of the saints. For the equipping of, and who are the saints in that scripture? It's like everybody, right? So these gifts, and by the way, the gifts are not, like you wouldn't call Hugh the Apostle Hugh now, or we would always say little a, little s, little t, right? But whenever God gives his gifting, he's actually giving the essence of who he is, primarily of who Jesus was. So Jesus was the great shepherd, right? He was the one that taught with authority. He was the first apostle, right? He was the one that was first sent. Same word, apostle, when it says, for God so loved the world that he sent, apostolic. He apostolic the Son to create new wine, all right? And it says to equip all of the body to do what? All the works of ministry. So that, interestingly, not so that lots of people will come to the Lord, it'll be great, so that the body will be mature and fully complete. What you're seeing in the church in the West, in this rapid decline, is simply because we have been immature. Not that we've been bad-hearted or selfish. It's that we've been trying to get new wine and new wineskins without releasing what Alan Hirsch would call the apes. That the apes have primarily been outside the church for the last 30 years. And what we essentially, in fact, the church began to decline in the late 1960s. And guess what started to pop up in the 60s and 70s? We called them parachurch. Young Life, Youth for Christ, Navigators, Campus Crusade, you name it, right? None of those existed prior to that. And all of a sudden, Billy Graham Association, Luis Palau Association. So a lot of our sort of apes, and generally you get new wine and new wineskins from the apes because they're the sent ones. So the Apostle Paul, that's why you have different epistles in the Bible. You have Thessalonians, Colossians, Ephesians, because the apostle, the sent one, Paul, would keep going and creating new stuff. Okay, so when we start thinking about reframing the church, obviously it's around Jesus, who then gives aspects of himself out to the body. Also, this is why the issue of gender becomes so important. When you have a shepherd-teacher model, and there's several passages that talk about women not getting to do some of those functions, that's why it's locked up half of the church for so long. When you start to see that God gives his gifts out freely to the body, then you begin to see that everybody plays without fighting on these other aspects. This is another conversation, but it will be coming down the pipe. APEST will begin to unlock everything. There's probably in the last 2 years, there's been about 20 books written on reclaiming the biblical model of leadership. Okay? So when I frame building kingdom ecosystems, we oftentimes talk about recentering an apostolic presence. Let me do this too. I'm going to frame this a little bit. Oh, that makes life easy. So after we wrote a book called The Tangible Kingdom, we were getting so much interest from existing churches about the new missiology that we wrote another book called And, which meant the gathered and scattered church. I'm going to be burping a little bit more after the lunch. Anybody get that? So if that happens, I'm sorry. But we brought back an article by a well-known missiologist by the name of Ralph Winter. And Ralph coined some missiology terms. One he called sodalic, and one he called modalic. I'll get this back to the story in a minute, but I feel like you have to understand this to understand what we're calling for. But sodalic meant the sent part of the church. And what Ralph was saying is that there's always two arms of the church. There's this kind of going sent. So the Apostle Paul would be like a sodalic leader. When you read Jesus going, go and make disciples, this would be the go element of the church. Make disciples would be more on the modalic. Okay? Modalic means the mode or the structure that's going to remain. So the Apostle Paul would buzz into Colossae or Philippi. He would make a bunch of sodalic fruit, make a lot of dust. New converts, crazy stuff happening, running from the law, if you will, crazy all-night prayer meeting, just like, casting out demons, raising people from the dead, just normal sodalic stuff, okay? And then people were coming to faith. And so then he would make these modalic adjustments or switches where he would say, well, let's appoint some elders because I'm going to have to keep sodalicing, so we got to have something that's going to hold all this fruit together. And that's what we would traditionally view more as local church type of expression where people are going to live their life together and stuff. Well, when you look at the APEST typology, all of this work is more from apostolic. Simple way to think of the apostolic gifting is the entrepreneurial. People that can kind of, they see about 2 years ahead of everybody else. They go out, we need to do that. And they somehow can dig it out of nowhere. How many of you feel like you have more of apostolic orientation? You like starting new. Usually apostolic people are a little more, risk doesn't freak them out as much. They're more willing to take risks. They generally are a little bit higher on the faith meter. They go, I think God can pull a rabbit out of the hat here. Okay, prophetic people, again, not to freak you out by that word, but the prophets were sent to do what? Prophesy, good. But it was like these were just normal people God sent to basically remind them to just get your act back together with me and then start taking care of people again. It was always the same message. It was about justice in the city. It was about doing right, So generally the prophetic people in a movement are the ones that are always going, hey, what about the poor? And then the next week they're like, well, what about the poor? What about the people freezing tonight? Usually the prophets are the poets. It's oftentimes tied to the artists. So oftentimes you go into any city and you find the little artist colonies, you oftentimes find your most compassionate people. In the Post Commons, we have this beautiful office down in the basement that was boarded up as well, but it's got the best view of the river. And a local artist named Monica asked if she could just paint out of that. And I said, sure, no problem. I didn't really know much about her. If you go on our website, you can see some pictures that she's done. But she's like world class. And if I were to bring Monica in here now, and Monica, she's been a part of our missional community. She's helping lead the warming center with the folks that are freezing to death at night. And she hasn't chimed in with Jesus yet, but she loves Jesus. She loves our community. But she would say that me allowing her to have a space to paint saved her life. And I don't know what that ever meant to her, but she always goes, Hugh saved my life. But being with Monica, I've found in her like the heart of the Mother Teresa over the city, And she doesn't, she's had some really painful experiences growing up in a Catholic church with physical abuse. Okay, so I don't know what will ever land for her, but she loves Jesus. She just can't be a part of an institutional form of Jesus stuff. Okay, it just does not compute to her. But I've met other people around her in the artist community, and they're like all the best people in our city. And so that's the prophetic sense. Those are the people that make things right again, okay? And then the evangelists, best way to think of evangelists are not the talkers. The evangelists back in the day used to be the megahorn people, the ones that were you would view as more gregarious or outspoken or bold. But in a missions context that we're in now where people are so anti-us, your evangelists are actually people that create warm spaces, the people that make it easier for people to come towards Jesus. They oftentimes are introverted. Introverts are more naturally, they're better with eye contact. You know people that talk a lot but they don't make good eye contact? They see through you. You know those people? Those are the worst of it, because nobody wants to be looked through anymore. They have to be seen. So oftentimes introverts that make very good eye contact and who touch people like physically, just a hand on the forearm or on the shoulder, people that create really warm hospitality, generally are the ones that make space for people to come to Jesus. So those are just the simple terms, but generally you get sodalic fruit, new conversion stories, changing of cities through the apes. But you still need the shepherd teachers. In fact, according to Scripture, the apostles always led the church, right? The apostle Paul led the whole thing, not the shepherd Paul. But he had to backfill with the shepherd teachers because they tend to be the ones that walk with people and catechize, which means help them to understand the Scriptures and what they've joined into. They mentor them through life issues. Somebody else way smarter than me said about 85% of the people in the church are actually more gifted in the shepherd teaching orientation because you need more. How many of you have actually helped a real person? Like through a hard thing, a marriage, a pornography addiction, a drug addiction. If you've ever done that, you realize you can only do like a couple of those a year, right? That's why so many of us need actually to be in this camp. So you need about 15% of the body that are the apes. But you do have to have them. When they leave the church, then the church is high-centered on the shepherd teacher, and then we make the pulpit the center of church life instead of out on the streets where the center of church life in the Scriptures were always out on the streets. But when the apes leave the building, then these poor shepherd teachers are doing the best they can, but they don't have what you need under the hood to get the job done. So when we start reframing church, we're actually trying to bring these two together. And what's interesting about what Ralph Winter did in this article, if you ever want to read it, Google God's Two Redemptive Structures, Ralph Winter. And he said that these people are first decision people. These are second decision people. This is important. Down here, anything south of the border would be like being on a Navy ship. We're just glad we got people on the boat. Okay? First decision in that to be a part of like a Sunday church service or typical small groups, all you have to do is kind of make the first decision to believe in God. And all that stuff south will make sense to you. But anything north of the border is second decision, and that these people say, we already believe in Jesus, but now we'll actually give our lives for this thing. And so now they begin to carry the weight, and they begin to go, look, this might cost us our life, but we'll do this. So Ralph in his article referenced that this was the general church in the Middle Ages. So like if a plague came into Prague and was wiping out hundreds of thousands of people, the Catholic Church would send out an email saying, everybody flee. And they would all flee their areas of sickness. Well, we know that the monastic communities, which were really your first, second decision communities, would then move into the areas and take care of people at their own peril. If you've ever heard of the Moravian movement, these were people that would sell themselves into slavery just to reach slaves. Second decision communities. So when we start talking about creating kingdom ecosystems, we're actually saying, like, let's start developing some Navy SEALs. When we go into existing churches that want to get back to more of a missional position in the culture, we say, yeah, just you can keep doing this, but we actually have to create a second decision missionary farm system where we actually train people how to be sodalic, be apostolic, prophetic, evangelistic in a culture. Okay, so any questions with this? I'm dumping about an 8-hour training on you right here. Do you see, though, why the church is struggling in this? Maybe it clears that up. It's really not about the heart. It's about design. It's really the design of the church. And we've been operating on one piston, maybe two pistons. We just don't have it. And this also says, look, we still need this stuff. But we just have to start. I need 15% of you to step forward to do this harder thing. And we're actually going to have to give you Navy SEAL training. And we're going to have to send you out into the cold night air with a parachute on. And where you're jumping, we hope you land here, but you might actually die during the process. Like, safe return home is not guaranteed up here. Here, yeah, you can just keep going to church the rest of your life, probably be totally safe. Is this making any? Okay, so when we start going, okay, let's go into cities and let's start changing cities, we start with an apostolic hub. So the building that we were given, that's how we always viewed that. That's going to be where everything emanates out of. So I tried to draw this out a little bit for you. And I want you to know that this is we're about 4 years into existence. Okay, so this is not going to be an impressive story, but I want you to see what we're trying to build. There's only about 40 missionaries in this story right now. Like, these are intentional people that have joined on. They're not a part of any other church. They're going, this is my church, these are my people, this is what we're doing. And we were having a little chat prior to lunch, that we primarily, if we have any metrics that we're looking for good works, okay? We're also looking for tables. I'll define those in a minute. Those are our biggest sort of metrics, okay? And we're looking for disciples. And a disciple is somebody that lives into this ecosystem. Okay, a disciple is not just a church attender or somebody that believes in Jesus. Even the demons believe, right? So we're not looking for just believers. We're looking for people that go, we're willing to actually die for this thing. We're willing to descend. Early spiritual formation gurus would talk about a cruciform spiritual formation. Most American life was upwardly mobile, right? Jesus always talked about a descending cruciform way. That's out of Philippians 2. That God, or Jesus who was God, became a man, and then he became a servant, and then he died. That's what we call cruciform. So where Jesus says, if you want to start with me, where do you start? You start at the cross, and then you follow my pattern. So then you keep descending. So life, the more spiritually formed you are, the more you will continue to downsize your house, downsize your money, create space so you have time for people, not go after all the things of the world. Like, that's Navy SEAL stuff, right? Most of the Navy's not going to do that. But if you want to be apish, then you're going to have to start descending, and that's what creates that apostolic center. So when we got the building, we started to create inside this ecosystem. I'm just going to give you the elements of an ecosystem. Disciples, there will be a different economy. Okay? We'll talk about gathering stuff. Somebody said doxology. I can't wait to talk about this. You guys are giving me all sorts of stuff. But in there, let's just talk about disciples for a minute. Okay? So in an ecosystem, kind of interesting, like when you think about Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, He didn't talk much about church on that, did he? Like the great sermon? He wasn't talking church right there. In fact, that passage in Matthew 16 might be the first time he mentions the church. I will build my church. They kind of probably went, what's that? But when he's talking about changing the world in the Sermon on the Mount, he talks at only the level of a disciple. That disciples would be salt and light, right? That they'd be like a city on a hill. So when you think about how Jesus went, here's how we change a city or change a country, whatever it is, he knew that the change agent would be the individual disciple. That's why the church is never the building. The church is only the individual people that make up that movement. My daughter in college got all those weird stomach digestive problems where we had to like go buy weird food for her every time, or she would just like not poop correctly, okay, for years. Became a real issue. We couldn't go out for dinner. It's just, any of you that deal with colitis or any of that stuff, it's just a bad deal. So I started reading about organics, because everything had to be organic and non-gluten-y, whatever you call that. One of my favorite flavors is gluten. But we start reading about all the organic stuff, and it's a crazy deal that prior to about mid-1970s, people didn't have gut issues. And you start reading about that. You know what? The simplistic way of saying why we're so messed up with food and gut issues is how we began to plow the fields. Started to plow too deep. And we started to dig away the microorganisms. And a little teaspoon of good soil, a little tiny teaspoon, there's 9 million microorganisms. That they say that that soil is the most complex ecosystem in the world. If the soils, you guys know this up in farm country, that if soil is healthy, it actually would take care of all of the carbon, ozone issues, the whole deal. But we have jacked up our soil as bad as we've jacked up our ozone, primarily by digging out all of the beautiful stuff that's in the soil. So when Jesus, and if you read the organics movement, the way that you fix that is you plant a cover crop. That's how you start. So soil that doesn't have any of the good stuff in it is just dirt. And you can grow stuff out of dirt, but you have to add all that other stuff that makes us not poop right. Okay? That's as simple as I can say it, okay? Done quite a bit of reading, but it boils down to that, okay? So what you need to fix that is something that holds all that in. It's called a cover crop. You can plant anything. Sugarcane, clover, simple grass. But that cover crop holds all the good stuff in, and then it rebuilds, and then it takes care of the earth. When Jesus was talking about go and make disciples, he was essentially saying, I need you to go create the cover crop for the earth again. It's dirt. And what's primarily made it the dirt, just dry dirt, is religion. Religion's the number one thing that will screw up good soil. That's why later he said, if you're planning to lead a movement of Jesus people, watch out for wolves and watch out for the leaven of the Pharisee. Watch out for the overly religious people, the judgmental people. Do you know some of those? Have you realized that you might be one of those too? I did come to that realization. You know that you're one of those when you think that Bible knowledge is a discipleship thing and that sermons are the most important part of the church. Because Jesus taught that you only know the scripture you obey. Gnosis. That the scriptures that you know about but you don't practice, the book of James, right? This is dead. This is dirt. So he's always going, no, disciples have to change the world. I need you to be salt and light. And by the way, if you've lost your saltiness, what's he say about that? Yeah, you might as well chuck it. So I have to ask you at this point of the day, we'll just start a good fight here. Is it possible that we have lost our saltiness? If we haven't, we're really close. And so maybe we have to reframe that. Look, our metric isn't church plants. Our metric isn't growing our churches. Our metric is how many individual people become salt and light. And then God can begin to build it. He can start. We gotta make it dirt, or we gotta make it warm, gushy soil again. So when we frame out a kingdom ecosystem, we're just trying to begin to bring something into our little town that's feeling kind of just dirt, dried up, not a lot of people smiling. So when we get the building given to us, I still think it's crazy that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit said, no, let's not have Hugh plant a church. Let's give him a building so he'll start a coffee shop. Like, that to me is fun. Like, the spirit of innovation of God. No, the last thing we need is another religious thing. We need a kingdom thing. So what we did in the building is we've become kind of the premier event space. We made it so beautiful. Prior to COVID, we had a wedding booked every weekend from March through December. So, and these are high-end weddings. These are $10,000, $20,000 weddings. People want to be in our space. So we have the Post Commons events. We have the cafe, all-day brunch cafe. We did brunch because there were enough bars in town. We were trying to go, what does this town not have? It had no breakfast joint. And what we've learned in the innovation world, most of your innovation happens before noon. Any of you eat a big lunch, then you try to go back to the office and get something done? That's useless, right? Most people, if you identify when they came up with the idea and then when did they work on it with the team and start really getting movement, it's before 12 o'clock. So your morning hours, early afternoon, are actually your most creative hours in any city. So we said, let's do a brunch cafe. We had a basement, so we are turning that into Groundworks, which will be an actual incubation, co-working space. This is, in any city, if people are trying to plant new churches, you'll oftentimes find, you go anywhere in the country and you frequent a third wave coffee shop or a co-working space, you'll oftentimes find that they are started by Christians that are creating space for stuff to happen. It's a really interesting thing going on. So then we started the roaster. Out of our building, my daughter doing the commons yoga that we mentioned. People go, yoga, timeout. That doesn't square with the whole Jesus thing. Remember the kingdom thing. Yeah, it doesn't square with the church thing. But the kingdom is about redeeming all spaces of life. Everything. There is no no-go zone in the kingdom. Okay? The kingdom is an overlay. And the way to think about building a church is literally to think about building another city amidst your city. Okay? So to build a city, your city has to be everywhere. Your people have to be everywhere, and you bring redemption to that. So these are some things that happen out of the building. Now, out of these 40 people, they work within all of these somewhere. So we have, some of these are houses, okay? So I'm putting a T at these houses. So I want to just kind of walk you through them. My daughter's house, the Piokas family, they don't do much. My son-in-law is a fireman for Alton Fire Department. My daughter tries to save the world. So they've gotten into foster care. So that's a foster care home. So numerical numbers are not the big deal in an ecosystem. It's depth of what you're doing. What we would say would be hard lifting, heavy lifting, okay? So that's one of our houses. The McCall house, this is an actual recovery house. It's 5,000 square feet. Somebody donated that to us. It's on a really rough street. So we moved a family in there that has 5 kids, and they just do recovery. So any specific emergency need, we say you can call our recovery house. So right now, we have space for about 6, but right now we've got a single mom with a little child. that came to us through a social agency that my other daughter worked at. So her teenager that was, just needed a place to live and get away from an abusive boyfriend. So she's in the basement with her little infant son, and then up above is a homeless gentleman that just came in, okay? The McCalls, though, all of them are apes. All of their kids are apes. It's like a whole jungle of apes. And so their kids go out on the roughest street in our town, and they just make friends with all the kids that don't have moms or dads. Most of them don't have dads, for sure. And so if you go walking over to the McCall house at any given time of day, especially around dinner time, there's usually 15, 20 people around the table. Okay, so they do the recovery work, but they also they literally take care of that neighborhood. There's only 2 black-owned businesses in Alton. One of them is from a real black leader in our town that knows the town, and I go hang out with him and just chat all the time. And I was like, Ben, what have you, and he's 1 block from the McCall house. I said, what have you heard about what's going on? And he said, man, I don't know where you got them, but those people are legit. They're actually changing our whole community. Okay, so just 1 house can be that. So that's a little picture of that. We have the Iscarus home. They also do foster care, but they also start what's called Riverbend Family Ministries, and that serves about 500 people a year. They're kind of like the Mother Teresa ministry of our town. So anything that's a crisis, the police department, fire department, everybody sends people there. Okay, and so they now have built out. They have 7 nonprofits that all work out of 1 building. Okay, but they're a part of our ecosystem. I took the gentleman that actually gave me the building, I called him back one day. I said, hey, take a ride with me. And Tammy and Retta had just gotten a building that their ministry bought, but they needed about $750,000 to renovate it. So I called John. I said, John, get in the car with me. Took him over. I said, you should give these guys money. And he's like, so we walked through, and John gave about $350,000 to. It was a nice payback. Okay, but that's just 1 couple in our family. So sometimes it's just taking care of 4 foster kids. McCall's literally are probably leading about 20 kids in their neighborhood. This represents about 500 people, and then they just decide to add 2 foster care kids. The Gaither home, they do a missional community of about 15 people, but she also leads the warming center, and so that takes care of about 40 people during those months of the year. We helped incubate another nonprofit called SALT that deals with nutrition for under-resourced kids. The Halter house, we have out of the Halter house a thing called Journeyman, where I take about 25 men every other week, and these are just guys that we've just been loving on. We're walking through the book of James right now. We also have what we call the Abbey, which is alternating weeks is a co-ed deal with about 30 people that we just walk through the teachings of Jesus without any religious stuff. That's what we do with them. So just between Cheryl and I, there's about 55 people that we sort of are teaching about Jesus every week at some point. And then my wife, because she's apostolic, when our son passed away, she wanted to take her horse equine stuff and actually help folks. So she got certified in what's called EGALA equine therapy. So strangely enough, and again, I want you to see how God builds out an ecosystem. I'm down golfing in Phoenix a few months ago, 6 weeks ago. Cheryl and one of her friends had just gotten trained in EGALA therapy. And we were praying about, man, it would be great to get an actual horse property again where we can do this. So we were just praying, like, maybe within the next 5 years. And I'm down golfing to get away from the cold. And while I'm down there, kind of like the building thing, like where you go, God builds his ecosystem. Down there golfing with two friends from Denver, and an old high school buddy comes to mind that I remembered lived in Phoenix. I said, hey guys, can I drop you off? I want to get a hold, see if I can find Brad. So I called Brad, and Brad's like, I'm like, where are you at in the city? And what are you doing? He's like, I'm over. So he was about 1 minute away from where I was when I'm texting him. I said, hey guys, can I drop you off at Starbucks? I want to hang out with Brad. So I sit down with Brad, and we're just laughing our heads off about me and Brad were best friends because we were the only two poor guys in our city or in our school. And so we got really close. He had a lot of abuse situations in his family, so we just kind of hunkered together. But I didn't really talk to him much. And so we're sitting down, and I'm like, so how's your life going? And he goes, well, this week is great. I just sold my company. And I said, so are you rich? He goes, yeah, I am now. And he goes, yeah, I have $30 million sitting in a bank account. And he goes, do you need any money? And I said, bro, I just called you to like catch up. But I'm like, it's awesome that you, out of all of our high school buddies, hit it big. And I said, I'm proud of you. I said, I could easily spend your 30 mil. But I said, you know, maybe let's talk down the road. I'd love to like show you what's going on around the country with some pretty innovative stuff. And he goes, but seriously, like, there's nothing you and Cheryl are working on. He goes, I follow you guys on Facebook. I know what you guys have done in Alton. Are you working on anything new? And I said, oh, my wife wants to get this kind of horse equine therapy going. He goes, dude, like, I've been thinking about, like, mental health issues and wanting some of my money to go to mental health issues. So he's pushing some resource our way. So I said, well, I mean, he goes like, what would it take to have it happen? I said, well, we just need some land. So my wife called me, you know, a couple days before this trip, and she found 80 acres just about 6 miles away from downtown Alton. And so long story short, 6 weeks ago, this all broke, and Wednesday we close on 80 acres. By the way, I was thinking today, driving here, I've been looking for a John Deere tractor. So if anybody on the simulcast knows anybody in the John Deere world, Halter needs a tractor now. I've always wanted a tractor my whole life. I never needed one, but now I need one. So Cheryl and I are literally going to start renovating an old farmhouse and build out essentially the apostolic recovery center for our whole movement. And then we're going to develop we're going to donate the other 40 acres to a nonprofit that we got started just a few weeks ago called Mount Hope, which will actually be run by another gentleman whose wife just died that just said he came to my wife at the horse arena where she hangs out with a horse, that I feel like we're supposed to start something to help people with mental illness. So are you guys sort of catching how this goes? These are not weird ideas that we come up with. These are passion areas that are inside the people of God. And then weird things happen where all of a sudden I think out of the blue while I'm in Phoenix, I think I'll call this guy. And then 6 weeks later, we have 80 acres that he pays for it all. So Cheryl and I are selling our house because we have to use our money to develop our 40 acres. And then we donate the other. Like, I just go, it's crazy. And how many people will sort of be helped just through this Egala thing? I have no idea. But this is just a little bit of a picture of what 40 people can do in a city. And if you add up the amount of people that we're actually talking about Jesus to or helping, it's about 600 people out of 40 people, okay? And those are not just program ministries. These are, every one of those people that we count, we're in actual friendship relationship where we're talking and we say we're building out the family, if you will. But it takes a little bit of an apostolic center. It's full of these disciples. The economy, you can see, is kind of unique, isn't it? It's both an economy of manna, where God gives weird amounts of money to do cool stuff. But it also has a sustainability factor to it. Is that the monies that we make from a lot of our business stuff, it supports all of these things. So the money we make from the coffee it covers the utilities at the McCall house. And we don't charge them rent because they're doing all this recovery work. So we'll give you a free place to live, and we'll pay your utilities as long as you keep saving lives. And we'll make the coffee on Monday through Saturday to cover that. And when we do a wedding event, it might go to help Fox's Boxes, which is a little bakery lady. And this is just the coolest story. We found her at a little local market. She was just selling her baked goods. And at our coffee shop, everything was awesome except our baked goods. They sucked. So I was down there looking for, like, does anybody know how to bake in this town? And so I'm trying her stuff, and I said, this is great. Like, could you come fill up? She's, so we start talking. She's like, I was asking her what her dreams were. She's like, well, been recovering from meth addiction. I've been clean for 6 years. We want a clean start. I've always wanted to have my own bakery. And so I'm like, well, can we help you? And I told her who I was. She knew who we were from just reputation. I said, our pastries suck. Like, I'd love it if you'd like fill up our case. And I said, why don't you just use our kitchen? She goes, that's what I need. Like, to be legal, I need to make my stuff out of a commercial kitchen. And so I said, just use our stuff. So I said, let's have a meeting, see if we can help you. So we met, her and her husband. They're atheists. They made it very clear they were atheists. She goes, I Googled you. I said, well, what'd you find? She goes, well, you're a Christian. I said, is that going to be a problem? She's like, probably. I said, so it's been a problem in the past? She's like, yeah, every time. And I said, well, can you bake? She's like, I can effing bake. I said, why don't you just bake, sweetheart? Why don't you not worry about my little Jesus thing? And why don't you just let us help you? And her husband, sitting like this the whole time, what percentage of our profits are you going to take? And I said, what's industry standard? He said, about 50-50. I said, we don't want to make any money. We just want to help you. Why don't we just take 20%? And he's like, that'd be great. But he was still skeptical, right? So we start our relationship like that. And then we pray. See, in our ecosystem, a lot of these people that work in this, not everybody, but a lot of them are missionaries. They're with us to build the church. So we pray together as a team, and while we were praying, my coffee guy, David, when we're done, actually towards kind of in the middle, he broke up the prayer, and he said, hey, I just got this sense, and Dave's prophetic. He actually has weird dreams and visions. I never do, okay? I just don't have that. And he goes, I have a sense that Jesus wants us to love them better. So we kind of stopped praying. We just talked as a team. Okay, how could we love them better? And we said, why don't we just not take as much? So we figured out exactly how much we need to not lose money. So we called a meeting with them and said, hey, we want to change the business. Her husband goes, oh, I knew it. Here it comes. And I said, no, calm down. I said, no, we told him, we were praying about you guys and your business. And we had this weird sense that we are not loving you as well as we should. And so would it be okay if we just charge 10% instead of 20%? Would that help? And then she starts to cry. She's, why the F would you do this for us? And I joked with her. I said, remember that little Jesus thing? I said, it's coming back to bite you in the ass, isn't it, darling? I said, he told us to love you more. I said, literally, that's all. We want to see you guys succeed. You've come through so much hard stuff. We're so proud of you. We want to be your biggest fan, okay? So we're all crying, a little hug. And so we start doing the Abbey. That's an easy invite to the Abbey. Hey, we just talk about Jesus without any religious stuff. So they became a part of that. They haven't come to faith yet, but they've asked me to help them with their marital issues. And, when we did our Christmas party last year before COVID, we invited them because they had become a part of our family. And we just said, what have you guys noticed has been great this year in our family? She was the first one to talk. She said, you guys have changed our whole world. We just couldn't, blah, blah, blah. I'll get all misty if I... So just a few weeks ago, they got their first real bakery shop. So she's asking me to come down and be the one that clips the little, ribbon as they get started. They're doing kind of soft launch right now. But to me, like our nonprofit Lantern Network, which we never talk about our nonprofit. Scriptures say, in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. It doesn't say with a megahorn, go tell everybody. It literally doesn't. It was like an internal doc. In your hearts, revere Christ as Lord, and then be ready for people to come at you and ask you about your life. That's the story of evangelism in the New Testament, is that the righteous prosper and the city rejoices, and they move towards good news. People will always move towards good news. And then you'll get to tell them about it. And it's actually quite easy. So this just maybe gives you a little bit of a sense. This is a kingdom ecosystem, not chock full of disciples. It's just got 40 by name individuals that are willing to be second decision people, innovate anything that carries the weight of people, from 2 little foster kids to we'll start an organization that houses 7 nonprofits to a simple little donation-based yoga class. We don't care what it is, but to be in our ecosystem, we ask them to participate in good works and to be willing to die. And so we don't have a public worship gathering because so far we haven't needed it. We have a spiritual formation aspect that we do daily together. We have scripture reading that we do together with our little phones. We have an email that goes around that every one of the missionaries is on, so anything that happens. So there's little popcorn prayer all day long. I actually have turned off the notice because it drives me nuts so much. And so we have these spiritual rhythms that we do. We do get together spontaneously, but at least monthly, and we have kind of worship time together, but we call it the side door because we want them all to come in the side door of the post. We're not open to the public per se for a couple reasons. Some, to be sensitive to the city. I think if we went public, people would think that we did a bait and switch on them. So we're going to do all of our Jesus stuff pretty subversively, but we're going to do our blessing and our good works openly, but we never talk about the name of I don't even know if people know that we have a nonprofit over what we do. They only know us as the team at Post Commons. That's our public brand. And then slowly, we just try to make good things happen and see what the Lord does. And to me, this has been the easiest ministry season. What I do, because I'm the president over the whole thing, but I don't have to lead anything. And nobody asks me to be their shepherd because they know I'm no good at it. They know I'm kind of I kind of get all the stuff going. They joke, they roll their eyes when I go, yeah, we had a guy give us $435,000 to buy 80 acres. I go, no surprise. So they know that I'm good at helping create stuff from nowhere, which you can tell from the story I really don't, right? But I pray every day, God, lead me into whatever crazy stuff you're doing. And I think, this is just 3 years of work. I go, look, we're going to commit our lives to this town for 30 years. I hope it represents many, many thousands of people. I'm praying for the whole city. I'm praying for St. Louis now because there's people that want to join our movement that are in St. Louis. But let's do a little Q&A now. I've done a lot of talking. Tell me some light bulbs that are going on. Tell me some points of tension that you're feeling. Let's just kind of riff off of how you guys are feeling right now. Speak free. I know you're Midwestern. It takes a while to warm. I'm sorry. I make so many Midwestern jokes still. I'm one of you now. I got to just lock in. Yeah. I don't, but I never liked that stuff, even when I was a preacher. I just have never been, personally speaking, I like listening to old hymns on bagpipes. I've never found a church that does that. So I've always had to get kind of my musical connection with God in other ways. But when we gather for our side door gathering, about half of our movement are ex-worship leaders. So we put on a pretty good little music set for half hour, 40 minutes, but we always eat breakfast together and sit around with our kids, and then that tends to be more spontaneous, and then somebody will do some type of we don't really have to do as much teaching because we're sending out teaching to each other throughout the week so much. It's almost like, it feels like we're getting 7 to 8 sermons a week. People will actually write papers and teachings that they're getting, and so there's quite a bit of like that type of teaching going on. I'd say almost everybody but me loves worship, but nobody, we've actually asked, like, should we open this up? Should we invite more people? And right now, everybody goes, no, like, it only makes sense for the missionaries right now. So our corporate gathering, if you will, is for the missionaries, or for people that are moving towards Jesus through one of our kind of micro ventures. I don't know what we'll decide 5 years from now when maybe this represents 100 missionaries. I could easily see us doing more worship for the city. Would make more sense for us. Like, I could see us doing Christmas Eve gatherings for the city. Like, people would come to us for stuff like that. We did an Easter thing last year, and it was just, we let people, first time ever through our website, our coffee website, go, hey, if none of you have a place to reflect on the Easter message, we're going to be out on this hill. And we had quite a few people show up for that, and just had a person on a guitar. So at some point, there will be a presence of, what would we say, just the doxology aspect of what we do. But I'd say everybody inside feels like they get that. There's other movements around the country, by the way. You might just note some of these. There's a network called Common Thread out of Birmingham. It's about 150 missionaries. The leader of that, apostolic leader of that movement, came out of a very well-known church in Birmingham. He was the worship leader, so everybody knew this guy. So when they started to build out their ecosystem, they're about 10 years in. They've bought about 50, 60 houses. They've got about 21 businesses started. They also have a coffee program that's very well known in the South that they started. But they just bought houses that became their worship houses. One specifically is their 24/7 worship house. And so if you are a part of their ecosystem, you can go there almost any time of day, and they say they have about 30 worship leaders in their ecosystem, and they just take turns. So there's lots of different ways to think about the worship inside the ecosystem. But so far, nobody has said we need to do like open to the public. We're a little bit afraid of the leaven of the Pharisee and our ability to manage that. So we're just trying to go, let's just make disciples. Let's do good works that the city cares about. And no, we're only communicating through technology. To me, I'm hardcore on disciple making. I think disciple making is just hard. When people say their church doubled in a year, I go, there's no way you can't double disciples. Discipleship to me is your whole life with people. So, like, I literally equate disciple making with conversation in the midst of normal life. So, like, we were talking over lunch, I still paint houses, and I've always hated painting houses. It's the worst thing to spend your time doing. But I do it because I always invite people from the ecosystem, usually the people that don't have jobs, because it's where I disciple. So, like, if somebody says, hey, Hugh, can we meet for discipleship? I go, no, never. But if you want to come be with me and work with me, we can talk for 8 hours. So to me, that's why discipleship, that's why I would say, like, if basically everybody's making disciples. Discipleship is nothing, the world makes disciples, agreed? Pastors can make disciples. A lot of pastors, they would call a disciple a church attender. Okay? All we're saying is that we are wanting to qualify what a disciple is. We want a disciple to be salt and light and be a preservative in the city, and we want them to be willing to do hard things. That's our internal doc, is that we do hard things, and everybody knows hard things is carrying the weight of people's pain. Poverty, spiritual pain, whatever it is. So we have to disciple to that end. Doesn't mean that a church attending disciple is bad. It's just that's not what we're discipling to. Because we think if we disciple to the level of a cruciform, willing to die for their faith person, we think we get more bang for the buck over the long haul. Okay? So we're like a Navy SEAL discipling corps. And we don't want to, well, none of us have time to really disciple to a non-Navy SEAL at this point. That will probably happen along the way, but yeah. Question, Wayne back. It's good with some, but the only struggles we've had to date have been with pastors from other churches. We get way more support from the non-Christians that are inside the ecosystem. So we're very loved by the peasant class. We are loved by some clergy, but they tend to be clergy that are kind of into the same thing we are. But we're judged by those that are Sunday-centric and can't understand what we're doing and why we call ourselves church. So yeah. And I think there's natural judgment too. When you actually really do help the poor and you don't have a church service, it just makes people mad. And I don't know why. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, everything sort of got challenged, right? So, but we really did thrive during COVID. We actually joked about being like little corona cockroaches, because we had already learned when you're purely relation-based, then COVID doesn't throw you off. And yes, our business took a hit, so we lost sales. We lost every one of those weddings. So we lost, in fact, we had built up enough money. We were about to buy 10 homes that were going to be essentially halfway homes. And we drained, in 1 month, I wrote back $60,000 to brides for their weddings that they put deposits down. So we bled through about $100,000 of cash reserves over that time. But we stayed alive, right? But every one of these, all these houses kind of kept going. Cheryl and I stopped our Abbey. Anything that was 30, I stopped Journeyman, but I kept teaching this Journeyman stuff through technology. We did some webinars with that. Eventually we all just got tired of webinars. And we just restarted both of these last week. So, but McCall House stayed open. They all got COVID, everybody in the house. They all survived and then pressed on, type thing. So Riverbend Family Ministries had to stay open because they're about emergency, and they just went, we're either going to die or, they were like early Navy SEALs. We're here for those that are, and it could kill us. So it didn't really affect us. It did affect our economy a little bit. And then now looking back, Manna, like we're doing better financially now than we were prior to COVID because we're nonprofit donations. We never asked for anything, but donations came in and all sorts of weird stuff. So we're actually way better now than we would have been if we had done all those weddings. Yeah, good question. It's built in because we just talk about Jesus all the time. You guys hear the question? So like we don't have to have separate times where we do like Bible studies. We actually are doing that stuff all the time. And there's prayer going. This is what's unique. When you actually are doing more apish activity, you're getting hit with real needs of real people almost at an hourly level. And you start to get desperate. So then you start praying. And then you start speaking scripture to each other. Okay, this is what God's saying. And yes, it feels like there's 3 to 4 or 5 times a week I'm actually at the coffee shop with the Bible open, teaching little segments of men that I kind of hang out with and stuff like that. So there is that, but I feel like it's the desperation of the needs that are coming across that keep us connected to the Spirit of God. Where and even the churches I've done in the past, when you're not connected to need and you're doing Bible studies all week, this feels like a different world compared to that. Like I almost look back and wonder if we were just wasting time. Because those men that I did those Bible studies with for years, they're no different. I talk to them still all the time. They're just, this is different. And when I look at different ecosystems, you might write down Love City out of Louisville. Look at Underground Network in Tampa. Underground Network in Tampa is 230 micro communities in and around the Tampa area. Well, in most of these ecosystems, the Sunday, or what you might call a corporate gathering, is only there to serve the micro mission networks. So yes, like Tampa had a very strong Sunday expression because they started as a church and then they started to build out the micros. Where Taylor and Lindsay out of Birmingham, they never started from a church Sunday-centric thing, so they had to add that element later. But interestingly, the Underground Network out of Tampa, that if you want to read the story of their movement, it's in a book called The Underground Church. It's very insightful on this. But they just stopped their gatherings. So they were 12 years in, and so many people were starting to gravitate to them as like the new cool church that they could not handle the weight of the looky-loo consumerism, and they shut down their gathering. And we find that the stronger the missional ecosystem is, the less they sort of need just kind of a general gathering. They want to gather for a specific purpose. And if it's just to worship, great, let's just worship. But they don't need a pastor to like give them the word for the week because they're all eating daily in their own, like when you lead a micro in Tampa or a micro with us, we ask you to feed yourself and to feed the people that are in your micro. So everybody has to be a self-feeder. Nobody has to wait for Hugh Halter to give them food on the weekend. And that's unique in kingdom work. And that's why Paul, as an apostolic leader, said, look guys, by now, what? You should have been, you should be teaching, but you're still feeding on this guy? Come on. So he's talking about what shuts down a movement, and oftentimes in our country, it's that Sunday-centric focus that literally stunts the growth of the disciples.
Yeah, so on the other side of the board, where Paul would go to the city, and then we have to leave to get to
Yep.
church or whatever.
Yeah.
Appoint an elder. Is that something that you even worry about, or do you just kind of focus on that faith test?
Yeah, it's actually interesting. In the Birmingham group, and I'm using them because they're a little bit farther down the road, if they have 50 homes that are represented in their network now, actual homes, those people, about half of them, they would call elders. So they have a specific function where somebody reaches, it's not like a utopia level, but it's where these are now trusted moms and dads in our movement. And that's, in a sense, the idea of an elder. That's literally when the word elder was written in Scripture, it meant the old people that are trusted. It's not like the way that we would view elder today. These are the ones that are a little bit wealthier or a little bit more influential out, so we put them as, no, the elders were literally the moms and dads. The language, guys, this is hard to get because we've had these lenses on. The language of the church is always family language. It's when you are brought in to the into the body, what you're adopted in. You're not converted. You're adopted, right? And then Paul calls you brothers and sisters. And then when he says elders, that's what he means, the moms and dads. So like in our movement, I don't ever call myself Pastor Hugh. Nobody does. But if you ask anybody, well, what's Hugh's role? They would go, he's like the papa. They call me Papa Bear. And they know what to call Papa Bear for. And if Papa Bear talks, they listen. But we also have Taylor and Lindsay, Mama and Papa Taylor and Lindsay, or my wife Cheryl, Mama Cheryl. So there are people that have natural influence, and it's not based on title. You guys realize that ultimately you really only trust people that you respect? You know, it used to be back in the day when we could fill up churches that leaders got to pick their followers. So Hugh Halter, as a pastor of First Church of Hugh's Church, could go, hey, here's the way we do it. So if you want to be a part of our church, you go through our membership, and then, you know. So leaders pick their followers. In the world that you guys live in now, and we were chatting about this at lunch, there's no innate respect anymore for the title, right? The only way that you will ever be a spiritual leader, a leader just means an influence. You're able to influence somebody. The only way is when followers pick their leaders. Hugh and Cheryl have been able to lead people spiritually to Jesus because we gave our lives for people. And so when their marriage has fallen apart, they call us and they let us speak. And as we speak about their marriage, we go, okay, can we take one night and just tell you how the Jesus thing has changed how Cheryl and I do marriage now? And then they go, yeah, we'd be open to that. And now we begin to proclaim the story of Jesus to people. I've never had any influence from a title or position, and it will get worse and worse. In fact, your title or your position actually causes people to respect you less now. So the only way you'll ever influence towards the kingdom is that you represent it. It's kind of interesting that Jesus never asked us to defend him. Like, he's a big boy. He can handle himself. But he asked us to represent him. That we're the letter that people read, right? We're like his ambassadors, as if he was making his plea to the world through us. And so what that means is that he's saying, if you'll be a true disciple, if you'll be salt and you'll illuminate spaces, if your jokes are better than everybody's jokes, if your food is better than everybody else's food, if your staff is a better staff than any other business in town, if the things you do with your money are better than what other people do, and if when we come to your houses we don't feel weird, like we feel so welcome, like your houses are the best houses, that's what we're trying to do. And you will find that all the things that we would tie to church, from a worship gathering to even Bible studies, like, just think about this. Your entire Bible was written to a missionary people that were fighting for their lives. And we read it in the context of we're not fighting for anything. So we literally can't even know the scriptures until we begin to fight the things that Jesus was fighting. And when you find that when you get into building ecosystems, you actually have demonic attack. Where I know friends of mine have been pastoring for years, and they go, yeah, it's just been kind of easy. Yeah, guess why? Because Satan doesn't have to wake up in the morning to try to fight people that just want to show up and sit in the pew and then show up next week. It doesn't bother him at all. But when you are establishing a new beachhead, so if you go on the Tampa Underground site, they actually have branded every one of their little micro churches. And the brands are based on the passion of the micro church. And it might be a guy that goes, I've always had a passion for donuts and helping these girls down on Main Street that are stuck in the sex trafficking. And so he starts a donut shop right down on the worst corner in Ybor, Tampa. And then he builds a team of little missionary women that help with these girls. And then it's up on their website. So now anybody that also has the passion for donuts and girls stuck in sex trafficking can go be on mission with them. That's literally what a missional community is. And it's really the only difference between a missional community and a small group is that a missional community has an actual mission. And they find people that are sniffing the same flower, and they go, let's go do that for the rest of our lives. In the Tampa world, they have what's called a calling lab, because a lot of people go, I don't know what to do. Where do I start? They go, come spend a whole day with us, and we'll guide you through what calling is. And then people leave, and they go, yeah, you're right, I do. I love donuts and these girls that are stuck. And then their church staff, all they are is an incubation equipping staff. So if you go to the Tampa Underground, their offices are all cubicles. It's a big co-working space, and all they do is they say, well, your mission, you actually need legal help. You're going to need to be your own 501c3, so that team will help you for free set up your legal stuff. And your micro needs some financial help. Go to our finance department. We'll run all of your money for you. We don't want you to waste time trying to figure out all that, and we'll do your taxes at the end of the year. We just want you on mission. So they literally view their church staff as their incubation or their co-working space. And then you can go to our graphic design team. They'll whip up a little logo, and we'll put it on our website, which is now a massive marketing for missionaries around the Tampa Metroplex, and we'll help you find your team. And then we have some pastor teachers that can help you figure out kind of how to set a table spiritually for people and how to actually talk about faith. So it's training from business development all the way to pastor development, to if you're going to do a neighborhood community and you're going to be actually teaching people about Jesus, if you don't even know how to do that, we'll teach you how to teach. So it's just it's equipping at every single level. It's what we call massive empowerment, which is how the movement of God has always happened in the world. So that's why I started with the APES, the equipping gifts. It doesn't mean that if you are a teaching pastor that you shouldn't teach. Of course not. But to get moving on this, what if you said by this time next year, I will spend at least half my time. So if your gift is teaching, what if half your time could be given to teach other people how to teach? Or if I'm an evangelist, what if by this time next year, I'll help 5 missional communities get started, because then they will be more evangelistic. So I'll give my time to coaching. Or if I'm a natural shepherd counselor type, I'm going to try to give half my time to equipping 5 other people to know how to shepherd other people through trauma, whatever it is. So to me, the whole movement of Jesus and the ecosystem is about continual equipping. And I don't ever have to think up, like I don't walk around Alton going, okay, what's another thing we need to do? I just pray, like as maybe an overseer in the movement, I pray. I pray over the movement, sometimes hours a day, that God will bring the passion and the vision for what needs to happen. And then I pray for funding, and I try to help with that, because that's a little bit of an apostolic thing. Paul was always fundraising. So I kind of do that for the movement, yeah. Yeah, those are the 3 main metrics, yep. Yeah, so she was, if you can't hear, I said the metrics, a typical metric for church is generally attendance or budget. Those are the traditional. We metric around, innovative good works. So right now I draw this out. We actually look at this all the time. We go, okay, so, and these are specific things, but we came up with the idea of tables. Table specifically represents when we are proclaiming Jesus to people verbally. Okay, so if my daughter starts Commons Yoga, that's a good work, right? But that doesn't mean that she'll ever tell anybody about Jesus. That just means she's going to help people that can't afford yoga, that are living in trauma, to have an hour break and maybe some physical fitness. So then we coach her, McKenna, how do we move you to a table? If she doesn't know what we're talking about, we go, at some point, what would it look like for you to see 5 to 8 of those women that come to yoga actually meeting with you, talking about Jesus? So a table means an actual conversation around Jesus. Okay? So like right now, all green, that's a table. So there's lots of proclamation, there's lots of Bible, there's even lots of worship, because Taylor and Lindsay are amazing work, so they'll just do spontaneous worship. The Halter house, both of these are tables. If they start doing egalitherapy, that will be a good work. It will only become a table when some of those people that maybe we're ministering to, it might be a young couple we might go, hey, you've already been up here to our house every Thursday night. We do this. So they might drop into a table environment. So we are trying to move people towards Jesus. All right. The Gaither house, they meet every week as a table. That's a table. That's a huge table, because they actually do team Bible studies for the entire network every Monday. And they invite anybody that's in any of those ministries that are being ministered to. So it's like sometimes it's 150 people down in their basement. And sometimes they ask people to come teach at that, so I've taught at that. So that's a table. Pioka's family is not a table, because they come to our thing. So that's an idea of table. And then disciples are just that individual. That's why I said it's 40. It's actually 41. So that's adults that we're helping innovate or be a part of what we're doing. How are we doing on time, by the way? We're fine? When that horse therapy, when Cheryl had the idea, it was just conversation between her and I. When I was down meeting with Brad and I flew home and I told Cheryl, hey, we should start thinking more serious about this now. Then we actually invited all 40 to come up when we found that land and look at it and pray with us and go, we think God's up to something. So generally on big issues, we will invite everybody into that. So that's oftentimes what we meet about when we gather, is what the other mission potentials are. So a lot of prayer over new innovation thoughts.
So when you say like mission potentials, your stories have been awesome today. It's very clear to see God is moving in this. You kind of just got to follow, like where the Spirit's leading. What about the potential failures, or where you feel like there's a mission potential, but then it doesn't pan out? Like, give me examples of that.
Yeah. We don't yet. Okay. But I will refer to, again, ecosystems where we've watched them a lot longer. Tampa talks really openly in that underground church about failures, and they view them as wins. They celebrate the fact that people try anything. So they literally, when they would have a church gathering, their weekly crucible gathering, which they said is all it is a conference for their missionaries. When micros would fail, they would bring them up. It was part of their culture. And people would just applaud them. Like, thanks for trying. Like, God's really, so yeah, that's the attitude in an ecosystem, is the only failure is not to follow through with something that God's leading you to. So far, even when COVID was at its worst and I was running out of, we got down to $2,000 total money in our entire network. And I went, wow, this was a great run, 3 years. I was thinking the building might go away. And at the same time, I had somebody that wanted to buy our building. And they offered me $2 million for it. And I remember thinking, we out, But, I thought even then, like, what would be the worst case scenario? We would take the $2 million and we'd go buy a little tiny place and we just keep the ecosystem going. We just wouldn't have the coffee and cafe. So that would have, we all talked about as a team, worst case scenario is not that bad. You can actually start an ecosystem without a business. You could just be a network. Like our Denver story, Tangible Kingdom, that was 21 micro communities, got to about 400 people. There was no paid staff. That was a total voluntary movement, and it was all based on just homes. So there was no business represented in that ecosystem. But we also didn't have the ability to affect the entire city of Denver. So that's why I think in smaller, struggling towns, a business-forward model probably makes more sense.
So this looks like starkly different, right, from what maybe most of us are used to.
Yes.
Now,
Yep.
being Sunday centric.
Yep.
I like that. So how does this start to blend together to where us being, well, I say us, but churchgoers and people that maybe are doing other things,
Yeah.
how do you start to blend together?
Yeah, usually, a simple way is that when you take an existing church structure that's more upwards, more hierarchical, is we'll try to take 10% of the church and then innovate them out into more missional community micros. And we literally try to just do it with 10% of the body. So we create an alongside Navy SEAL pathway. So we usually tell existing churches, just keep doing what you're doing, but try to release the apes. And that looks like 10%. So if you have a church of 100, we'd be looking for 10 people, and we would coach them into developing their own micro communities or micro missions. And then we would try to double that year 2. We try to get to what we call the tipping point. And this is sort of a truism. If you can get a new culture or a new DNA to take root at about 16 to 18% of any existing culture, it will eventually tip into the rest of the movement. So we don't try to take a whole church and go, hey, go try what Halter's doing. We'd say by cover of night, we'll try to find 10 Navy SEALs, and we'll coach them into this, or we'll disciple them into this different way of doing life. And then we just keep going. So I feel like that's what we would all be doing anyway. I mean, at any given moment in any church, not everybody is on mission, right? Very few. So it's just, you're just trying to get more people on mission. It'd be just, like even the story in this church, my missional community, we've had very candid talks, missional community was much more forefront when it got started, but obviously when you do public worship, you have lots of people that come in, that's not their story, right? So it tends to weight down or water down some of the original story. It's just that continual give and take. But usually when you reboot, you go, oh, that's where we used to spend almost all of our time, was helping missional communities get going. So it's just, but again, the weight of consumerism, we could not even handle it in Denver, and we knew it was coming. But just having 30, 40 new people every week that didn't want to live into our original story, we tried to help them, but it pulled us off of our game as much as we didn't want to. So I just think that's, again, it goes back to the discipleship thing. You just have to get to where you have entry-level discipleship and you have missionary discipleship. So a lot of times with churches, I'll go, the language is you just want to create a missionary farm system. So you have church attenders and you all have missionaries. You try to get less and less church attenders into the missionary flow, but it's a different level of disciple making. A lot of churches will do a full year learning community. 30 people will enter, and we'll walk with them for the entire year in how to get a missional community with an intentional mission going. So yeah. Why do you think they go away from this? It costs too much. It's, if I can be super candid with you guys, I don't think we do this stuff because we don't want to. It's hard. It's not just that I'm introverted. I also, when you get into real people ministry, it's hard. I think we don't want to do this because we know it will work. It's easier to go to something that doesn't really work but also doesn't bother us. Then we can live our lives. So I think that's why we said we started the whole day talking about Jesus, right? I would never do this if it wasn't for Jesus. I'm not disciplined enough. I'm not even selfless enough. But I keep running into this fact that actually I love him more than anything on earth. And he compels me. What's this say? The love of God compels me. It's the only compelling factor would be that we're willing to die. I mean, who really wants to die? That used to be in Denver. That was our membership class. People called it the death talk. Because I would just say, look, we're all of us are done just doing church. And we're all dying together. And none of us really want to die, but we've all decided we're going to die to our death. So we're dying to our individualism, our consumerism, and our materialism. If you would love to come and die with us, we'd love to have you. That way it's clean and simple, it's honest. We say, if you're not ready to die yet, there's 10 other churches that we list on our website. They're good Bible teaching churches. If that's what you need, great. We don't belittle people for not being ready to die, but we also don't want anybody to pull us away from it. The Christian movement historically was always a counterculture movement of people. They were always weird. They were like aliens. And until we regain our little alien status, the world will have no interest or reason to look to us for spiritual help. We are a non-factor to them right now. If you want to ever read an inspiring or hear an inspiring message, a good buddy named Mike Frost has one on living a questionable life, where he outlines that passage where Paul is saying, he's saying as an evangelist, to be like Hugh saying, hey, guys, pray for me that I'll have boldness to speak and open doors to proclaim. And he said, and for you guys, maybe those that aren't gifted with evangelism, I pray that you would be ready to answer when people come to you. And he frames it beautifully. He says, why would anybody ever ask you anything unless you live a questionable life? And there's nothing questionable about going to church right now on the weekends. It would only be questionable. Well, here's what would make you questionable, is if you actually had spare time to give somebody. So if you had a friend that was struggling, and you could say, hey, why don't we spend Wednesday together? Like all Wednesday? Yeah, I'll clear the whole day for you. That would make you questionable. Or if people saw you giving of your resources or moving your house to another part of town because you wanted to, or even moving out of town to get 80 acres. People have wondered, why I thought you guys loved, they're already asking, I thought you guys loved your house. Oh, we did love it. But Cheryl had a crazy idea to help people with mental illness with horses. So any time that you can have an answer that is like where they go, seriously? Why would you move to Denver? I had so many people from Alton, they'd tap me on my shoulder at grocery stores and go, are you Hugh Halter? I go, yeah. So we heard about you guys. You're the only family that's moved into Alton in the last 9 years. Why would you came from Denver? I had a woman yell, why the F would you leave just within a grocery store while her kids are right there next to her? So there has to be something questionable. If you had even 6 of your friends and you met every Thursday night at your house and you prayed and ate together, and then you started to do things together, people would actually know that you're doing that, and they would think that that's weird. And that's what you want. And then when you actually do that together, they always see you at the same coffee shop with the kind of all talk, like, what are you guys talking about every week? And you go, well, we're all doing this common mission together. They would think that's weird. So, it's not rocket science, but you simply can't just keep going to church. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we call Ryan the spiritual patriarch of all of our families. And everybody, all those 40, they know that they're also beholding to Ryan. Because if Ryan didn't have his disability, we would never even know them, right? You ever process that scripture where it talks about people that come into your life and like make sure you don't screw it up because they might be angels and you don't know it? I have a theology that a lot of the disability community is angels, because we've had so many weird things happen with Ryan, and I feel like God does send us people that pull us into His mission. I know I would not have done this without Him forcing us after His death. I just think it's in our DNA now. It's almost like we can't, as a family, stop. But if you really think about, we call lamentations is always what leads to innovations. Suffering is really the center of a ecosystem. You create a new micro mission because you can't take it anymore. Sometimes I'll tell people, if you don't know where to start, what makes you cry? What can you not stand watching anymore on the news? What are you unwilling to let it be there? What are you worried about your kids dealing with? At some point, the pain of the world is what always drives mission. If you try to actually make up something cool, like, oh, I like that coffee shop idea, I think I'll do a Christian coffee shop. There's nothing worse in the world than a Christian coffee shop. Okay? So nothing is just cool and like, it all has to be driven by suffering. And to do it, you will suffer. So there's no way for me to soft sell this. I think Ryan's disability, even, it was crazy. We did his memorial inside the Post Commons, and his entire adult disability group came by in bus after bus load. It's right during COVID, so they couldn't get out of the buses. But we all knew they were coming, so we all stood outside. All these people that didn't even know that story watched all these disabled adults go by with signs about Ryan, and you could just see everybody knew that suffering is literally at the center of the Jesus movement. Why did Jesus do all this teaching with 11 guys, 12 guys, and one deserter? Because they were all going to die. So that's why I keep bringing up once you settle that you're a dead person, then you can lean into suffering. This is the great, whenever you hear great sufferers, a Mother Teresa, a modern day, they go, Jesus taught you get closest to Him in this stuff. You don't, and there's nothing again wrong with a Bible study, but you don't have to suffer to do a Bible study. It's actually nice, right? It's usually in a warm place with people you're already comfortable with. And you don't really have to suffer, at least in our country, to be in a church on Sunday. You do in other places. So this to me is about the only way in our Western American context where we can lean into His way. You have to find the suffering and then voluntarily, as a Navy SEAL, choose to take on the mission. And what I always tell people is, even with the Ryan factor, everything, it's like I would never want to ever go back. It's like once you've tasted of this, you can't go back. I could never just like get the kids in the minivan and go somewhere to sing 3 songs. And I just, again, there's a ton of beautifulness in that story, but I can't just go once you've been to that other side. And so to me, I feel like it's where Jesus starts to actually reform us, like where we really become different people. I am a different person because of what Jesus did for me when I was in 5th grade, when I said yes to Him. But I would say it's what Jesus has done with me really the last 15 years and committing to suffer. I didn't really become a different person for the first 20 years. The suffering is what caused the different Hugh Halter, for sure. Yeah. When I said we're going to teach Jesus without the religion, I was basically, most of the people that I was talking to had grown up Catholic, and they had said, I don't want to do that anymore. So to them, church was religion. When we look at Jesus even coming to earth, John 1:14, the Word became flesh and He made His dwelling among us. It says, so we were able to perceive the glory of God. The reason why Jesus came in human form was because religion was veiling the face of God to the world. So the only way to show people who God really, remember, Jesus was always just trying to show who the Father was. So the way that we would show people what God is really like is it's got to look different in blue jeans. And so when I say I want to teach you about Jesus without any religion, I'm saying I want to just teach you Jesus. If you take Jesus and you add anything to Him, you're making religion. Okay? Jesus did not come to start a new world religion. He never, that's why He never put a name on it. Imagine that. You're going to change the whole world with a movement and you don't even need a name to it. Why would He not need a name? Well, because you'll know my disciples by what? By the fruit, by how they love one another. You literally don't need a name to this thing. It doesn't need a brand. It's just Jesus. And I feel like right now, missiologically, when you say the word religion, everybody goes, that's what's killing the world. Right? That's what's been killing it for hundreds of years, thousands of years. It's been all this religious. The pain of an atheist is they see what religion has done in the world. They can't make sense of it. So the only way through is a non-religious, real deity embodied in the person of Jesus. You could try that sometime. Ask some friends, why don't we just study the teachings of Jesus without any religious baggage? Doesn't matter where we came from, Catholic, Protestant, Mormon, whatever, nothing. Let's just take just His teachings. I would use that language. I would never invite somebody to a Bible study. I would invite people to study the teachings of Jesus. That's just like a little pointer. Because people don't think the Bible carries authority right now, but they'll still listen to Jesus. So Jesus, who said, I am the Word, right? So the authority is actually in the person of Jesus. The authority is not in the pages. It's a living Word. It's Jesus. So I think if we always frame the gospel story in the king or the kingdom, you'll always be safe. If you talk about the church, Christians, religion, you're hurting yourself. People want to talk about the king and the kingdom. In fact, every non-Christian around you would love for the kingdom of heaven to come into the world. The kingdom of heaven, by the way, we talk about it, but we haven't talked about it. When Jesus talked about the kingdom, all He was saying was that the way that it is now in heaven can now be manifest on earth. So when there's no poverty in heaven, that means when you help somebody out of a financial hardship, in that moment, you are bringing a little heaven to earth. If there's no loneliness in heaven, then whenever you get a few friends together and you provide community, you're bringing heaven to earth. Because there's no anger or rage in heaven, when you provide a safe house and you bring that little single mom in and you calm her down, you give her a big hug and you give her warm food and say, you can live here as long as you need to. You've brought a little heaven. So it's not rocket science. It's the way that it is in heaven. He goes, it's now at hand. The gospel message isn't just an afterlife message. It's for now. So again, you don't have to do wild exploits because the kingdom of heaven is eternal. There's no impatience in the kingdom. So when you give a full day to a buddy out fishing because he's having a rough marriage issue or he just got laid off, little kingdom, little slice. What else are we thinking? Yeah, the issue of like accountability, it's the same. Mission is what creates real community. It's also what creates real accountability. It's like it's a crazy factor when you start ministering to people, and let's just say you're struggling with some inner sin issues or something like that. You will find that the more you minister to people, the more you internally go, I got to get my act together. When you just are rolling into a church service and you're not responsible for anybody else's spiritual life, you can stay in your sin forever, as long as you can take it, right? But when you are literally going, look, I'm spiritually guiding some of my friends, it's built into the community that they see when stuff's... We've had in our community, little stuff we might find. We're out for dinner, and I noticed that one of my friends speaks fairly belittlingly to his wife when she's over talking. And eventually I can see over dinner that it hurt her feelings when he said, babe, chill out. Well, even that little tiny marital thing, because you're doing life all the time together, then I can take my buddy and go, hey, the other night when we were out for dinner, there was that little awkward moment where I think like you hurt Sharon's feelings. Like, did you guys have a little, yeah, he's like, we drove home and we got into it. I said, does that happen a lot? Yeah, I'm pretty sarcastic. And so we talk about it. So I find that whenever we did, even the Tangible Kingdom story in Denver, the issue of personal accountability, personal sin, it was naturally taken care of inside the community because you can't hide anything anymore. You especially can't hide it when you're on mission together. And I will tell you, I've been in an accountability group where a world Bible leader called me and 3 men into an accountability group, and he wanted to do real accountability. And it was just 2 years ago we caught him with some Russian prostitutes, and he was setting up men's accountability discipleship groups all over the world. So I've learned Bible studies and accountability groups actually don't make you accountable. True communities of mission, they do. Yeah. Pull it down just so I could barely hear that. Well, if they were forced, they wouldn't last. That's why we never try to give anybody any vision. We say we're here to equip you with whatever comes up. So sometimes though we'll have visions that come and they're immature visions, so they're not quite ready. If you go to the Tampa Underground, I've been a part of some of their gatherings where every staff meeting every Monday, they're processing the new micro church visions that are coming up, and they'll literally talk it through and go, hey, do you know this person? And they'll say, yeah, actually, I've talked with her. I think she's like 6 months a little early. She's got to deal with some stuff with her marriage before that. So they actually help try to guide that, the immaturity, if you will. But they also have kind of an internal ethos that they never say no. They might say, we recommend not yet. And that's happened in our setting in Denver as well. But if they're not ready or if they're fake, they're just going to fail. And that's okay. You know, that's how everybody grows. Even though right now the stories I'm telling in Alton seem to be working, I've had lots of other visions and things that I pursued and tried to raise money for and put a lot of time into that didn't work. It feels like most of them didn't work. So right now we're having some wins, probably because you can tell the Lord actually was sticking all of his chips in the middle of the table, like we were being forced to do what he wanted. He wanted a coffee shop, and he wanted a event space, and so I feel like because we weren't trying to force anything, I think we're having more success right now.
Really helpful when you're using the language first decision and second decision. The type of communities, you know, at least at Sacred City, that we're wanting to cultivate are second decision type of communities.
Yep.
We're committed to practicing the way of Jesus.
Yep.
And the way that all of life comes under his authority. And we talked a little bit about this before, but there's really people who come along that are, they step into it and it's really sexy for like 3 months. And then they're like, oh, it's kind of like we talked about before, it's too hard.
Yeah.
And then how do we, you know, like that's something that we come into, I think time and time again, somebody steps in, maybe not what they thought it was cool for a minute, and then how do we handle folks like that? They want to kind of check it out.
Yeah. Again, I'm just going back to personal experience. When we were doing non-business oriented neighborhood missional communities, we had a lot of people that would jump into our communities and then blow out. When I see these types of communities that are more business or intentional mission focused, we see way less fallout. And the way that I would process that is that when people are looking for friends and it doesn't work out relationally, they leave, right? Again, I think that's why a mission-focused group, it just helps in all of these ways better. If let's just say you're working with refugee communities that are on a certain side of your town, they all live in this 3 apartment complexes. You go, look, 4 of our families, let's move in around that area and let's let that be our mission. You're generally not going to find a looky-loo that'll go, yeah, I'll move down there with you guys. It might happen, but usually the deeper or the harder the mission, the more it will filter out. But again, even if that were to happen, what's the harm of that? Somebody goes, we're just not into it. Okay, thanks. I still think it's worth driving the mission, so to speak. I don't think, though, it's worth putting all of your local church time into trying to help everybody get plugged in. I think that's too much work. Yeah, we still have people that will think they'll like try to find their way into our community, and they'll go, or especially back in Denver when we were more of these neighborhood communities, they would always say, well, plug us in, we're ready to go. I remember one gentleman, he actually sent me an email saying, hey, we've been reading your books, and we had a choice between Denver or San Diego, but we chose Denver because we want to be a part of your movement. And we've led this very similar movements in other cities, so we're ready to go when we get on the ground. I remember being nervous about that email. And they did show up, and I remember he walked in, he said, hey, we're here. And I said, okay. He's like, who do you need us to lead? I said, we don't need you to lead anybody. We want you to go through our process. So don't worry about it. We read everything. We're good. Just give us some people. And I kept pushing back, and he got really weird with me one day in the parking lot, almost like he was going to fight me. And I said, look, Joe, your intensity's really off-putting right now. And I said, just so you know, we're kind of like a Jimmy Buffett movement. You're like the Terminator. And I just, I'm seeing some just stylistic problems here. He pushed against that. He just was, and then, I don't know, 3 weeks later, I see him in church, in our church service, by himself. I see some men praying with him in the corner. And afterwards, one of them said, apparently he got in a fight with Sharon this morning. He just wanted prayer. Well, I called Sharon, found out she was physically abused by him that morning. And so I sent him an email and said, hey, I'm glad the men were praying with you. Very sorry to hear what you guys are going through. I said, but this is why we wanted you to actually be a part of the family for a while before. And he did then come over to my house and stand in my front yard and want to fight me while my kids are having a birthday party in the backyard. That's a rare story, but when you try to just pander, it's a great spiritual leader that said, whatever is not transformed in a person by Jesus, whatever is not transformed in them will always be transmitted to the next culture they go to. So if they've left lots of other churches because they've run into relational issues, and you plug them into one of your missional communities, it's just a matter of time. So we always like people to suffer for a while or show a little humility. And we definitely would never plug them in. If they go, well, look, I thought you guys were all about community. We go, no, actually, we're all about mission, and we find community through mission. You don't ever find real community without mission. You find friends, and you'll blow out on them as soon as you have one. You find out they like Trump and you don't, then you're gone, right? But if you find mission, you might actually stay together, even though one of you has got the Trump thing and one of you doesn't. Mission will drive it will actually be your security and your filter to the whole thing. So if somebody doesn't, I would still, if I'm pastoring an existing church, on the modalic side, we tell churches, I would still have groups ministry down here. I would have modalic, shepherding groups. Almost like anything south of the border should be triage. They should be getting people healthy. So if somebody says, Hugh, I really want to go up this mountain pass that you're going up with your mission team, and I notice that his femur is sticking out of his jeans, he's broken to the core, I go, look, Joe, I want you to be with us on mission, but look, let's tend to your broken leg for a while. So I want to have some modalic ministry. So if somebody's new to town and they heard about your church and they come and say, hey, we'd like to get connected, that's great. That's a good passion. So I would have connection groups, but I'd say those are little dinner clubs. We do them for 4 weeks. I'd have everything on the south side short-term in duration. I'd have recovery groups, divorce recovery, anything where people are broken. I'd let your shepherds and your teachers love the heck out of them with no call to mission at all. Just love people that are mentally ill. They may never be able to go on mission, right? We're still called to love people that are just broken, right? So have stuff for them, but always try to get to where, look, this is hospital down here. So you might even have Bible study groups down here. But these are 8-week courses in how to study the Scripture for yourself and feed yourself. And then I would have missionary training up here. So I think what most churches do, they have endless, no end in sight. We'll try to plug you in and connect you. But these should be closed groups. These are controlled by the Navy SEAL leaders based on the mission that they're on. So I would never have my missional communities per se, like churches used to have Bible studies. They'd show where in the city their Bible, so just grab any of those. I would keep your missional communities quiet. I let people build their own and manage. We were joking about, you have a great missional community and then a woman or two comes in, or a man that's an over-talker, over-preacher, and they wreck in one night what you've been building for 2 years with people. But down here, it's safe. Even in our setting, when we were 24 communities, we would draw out our movement like this, all these missional communities. I had 4 of them that were specifically uber shepherd, and all these people, they said to us, anybody that just doesn't fit any of your missional communities, but they're trying, we love those types of people. We'll start our own communities with those people just to love on them. And I was like, oh, that's fantastic. So anybody that just didn't quite fit, we still tried to love on them as best as we could. Okay? Yeah. So Fox's Boxes, our little bakery, is not under, there's no particular governmental tie. So Lantern Network is our overarching governmental 501c3. So anything here is under that. We incubated this nonprofit, but they're not governmentally tied to us, but I'm on the board of that nonprofit. We don't really care either way. We say only be under our umbrella if you need our help. If you don't need our help, then we prefer not to manage you financially or whatever. But obviously, they're a part of our spiritual community, so they would say, this is my church. And they would say that I was incubated by Lantern Network. Riverbend is not under us governmentally. They have their own 501c3. But they would say spiritually we're a part of this 41 people. We cover insurance-wise that house because that house was donated to our nonprofit. So we technically own that house, so that's under our insurance. Obviously, all these separate homes are not. Well, it would be that they're at least still doing hard works, right? Or they're doing a good work, and that they say that they want to be spiritually accountable to us as a church. Yeah, they're just declaring you guys are our church, you're our people. So, yeah, so it's nothing really. I mean, recognize the church has existed long before the IRS got here, right? So there was no legality of the church. It's kind of an interesting thought, isn't it? Like, there didn't need to be any organizational tax structure to anything up until 200 years ago. That's wild. So really, the church has always been this invisible thing that God builds. Even this thing where we see people on Sunday, remember Jesus would say, look, I have sheep that you know not of. We would go, these are all of our sheep. That's not true. There's sheep and wolves and everything. There's wheat and tares and everything, right? He tells us not to worry about separating it out. Trust me, I'm building my church. But his church is all these other sheep too that he's bringing in really weird, unique ways that may never come into this setting. And so the declaration of are they a part of us, I think you'll know that by their fruit, their covenant. So the other thing I didn't mention, but undergirding this whole thing, we always say is covenant. So we're not looking necessarily for people to sign necessarily membership stuff or things like that. The covenant is that they will do hard things with us, that they'll create good works, and that the covenant is the one another's. It's the love stuff, right? We'll stay focused. We'll die together. So that's covenant lingo for us. Yep. Yeah, the shift was really the tangible kingdom story in Denver. When we moved there, we bylawed Adullam as a missions community. So we were experimenting with church as a pure mission movement. And when we saw that work, that started to change things. And it was the specific mission that we realized was changing everything. So we had people that would come in and like what we did, but they just wanted to do Bible studies. They just never lasted, and they never did anything. And the people didn't grow. And so probably 4 years into that 15-year story, we just said intentional mission has to be what drives everything. And that's probably where I went. You know, we had already planted another church by that time. That's when I just started to feel like it was the mission component that was literally the key to the entire enchilada. And then, you know, a lot of the benefit I had is I got asked to speak all over the place. And the only movements that I saw that seemed to actually change cities were these weird ecosystems that had intentional mission. So it's just when you start to see the same, when very little is working. Most of the time when I travel, I see churches in decline. The only times I saw churches moving forward, it was when they were not Sunday-centric, but they were mission-focused. And I found a far more robust, sturdy spirituality with the people. And they didn't need somebody to lead them. They were leaders. They were being developed as leaders. There was no consumerism in those ecosystems. So you just started to see themes that you went, well, that seems to carry the day, and all these other things seem to just struggle like crazy. Trust me, I'd rather the Lord just did his revival thing that he's done every once in a while. I mean, that'd be way easier. And I hope it still happens, honestly. I don't know what will cause it. COVID didn't even cause it. Either Americans are the toughest sons of guns out there. But you would have thought COVID would have brought people to churches' doorsteps begging for help. And maybe not even one. But I do pray that someday people will just drop on their knees and just go, teach me about Jesus, and we could start filling churches again. That'd be way easier. I think the beginning of, and it's only happened, I think I've heard it's only happened 8 times in the history of the church, where we go through extended seasons of non-conversion. And I think the church, we've been exposed in this last 5 years for overlooking deep racist tendencies in our movement, deep economic exclusion policies, strange male dominance. I mean, we've just been exposed for a lot of things. And I don't think the world will just easily go, oh yeah, if you guys just say you're sorry. So I think we're going to go on to a pathway here. Again, and this might be good that we start to close up, but I feel like what I'm presenting to you is not so that it will work for you. You might do all of these things and still encounter incredible struggle, and you might do this really well and people don't come to Jesus. I think that might be a part of all of our futures. So then why do it? Why not just kind of wait for the Lord to come back or whatever? I think it's about whether or not you can enjoy Jesus for yourself. Like, I actually like doing all this crazy stuff because it's kind of fun and exciting. And I do get to see little pictures of the power of God all the time. And that's enough for me. Like, if I don't see a huge movement, if we're only 60 people 10 years from now, but we're 60, like if you could come be a part of us in Alton, you would love us. Like, I actually think you would go, this is what I've been looking for. We're together all the time. We actually have a lot of fun together. A lot of them play board games together. I hate board games, but like our community, they would go, we do life together. So if we're still stuck at 40, I still go, my grandkids are going to think this is pretty cool. My daughters already loved it so much they wanted to move here with us and do it again. So I think you got to decide for yourself. It's the Jesus conversation. At some point, I would ask you guys, like, aren't you tired of not seeing the power of God? Like, I sure know, like just a little glimpse, like just that little Sarah the baker lady. For her to just let me cut the ribbon on her business and say, we owe it all to you guys. Like, I can go a year on that high. Because we're getting the respect of an atheist that's having a hard time not believing in Jesus. If I can just get 4 or 5 of those a year, then I'm good to go. I just know that I would get bored and cynical if I don't see Jesus show up. And he doesn't promise that he's going to show up in our religious stuff. So if you find that you've been doing the same thing for a long time and you're getting cynical and you're deep down you're starting to go dark. This whole day might have just been so that you and Jesus can have a nice long walk together again and reestablish, the death talk. Yeah. And at least I get coffee. I have my own coffee shop. Look, I'm 54. You guys are all young. When you get to my age, you'll realize that a great day, this is extra credit. This should not be on video. But all you really have for a good day to happen is a good cup of coffee. My wife and I, to survive our son's epilepsy, because I would always be on the night shift with Ryan. So I usually got 1 hour sleep a night for 20 years. But I always got to have coffee with Cheryl at 7 o'clock every morning. And then we would always do coffee at about 3 o'clock. We always had 2 coffees. That's how but I just learned if I can have coffee, a good cup of coffee in the morning, have a few friends along the day's journey that I enjoy seeing, and something a little bit meaningful to put my hand to, and then I can close. This is just Hugh Halter. And if I can just close the evening with a nice glass of wine, that's a pretty good day. Little bookends. A little meaningful mission, some good friends, and a couple of those on the front and the back end. I love life. That's great. I could probably even do without the cups of coffee. The meaningful mission and some good friends. I don't need the big wins anymore. And I've done the church thing where there's lots of people in the room. And I know on Monday I'm still depressed. It's a weird psychosis. Because it must have been that I was looking for something else, that even that doesn't quench the thirst. What quenches the thirst, as Jesus said, is living water. As Jesus said, the bread for me is to do the will of my Father. So I think what finally satisfies every human's heart is the bread of mission. That's what Jesus meant. My bread is to do remember that? He's being tempted by Satan. My bread will fill this gut is to do the will, the mission of God, and I'll drink this living water. Then we're getting somewhere. But it may not work for them, but it can work for you guys. Any other just kind of, has this been at all helpful, or has this just been like, did I fire hose you, or I wanted it to be good news. I didn't want this to be crappy news. I hope you also feel and hear the honor and respect for the different forms of church that we've all come into. I came to faith walking the aisle in a normal Bible teaching church. Very thankful for any form of church. But all we're saying is that certain forms of ecclesia, they work when the values of the culture connect with the rhythms of the church. All we're saying now is that in the last 15 years, our world has changed remarkably. We are now in a pure mission field. And so if a form of church does not connect with that mission field, it's not bad. It's just not missiologically appropriate anymore. And I would say that the Sunday-centric and even the economic model of the Sunday-centric church, where only usually on average 5% of the income gets out to the mission field, is an untenable design structure for the church of the future. And what a mission field needs is not more of the same, and it doesn't just need minor tweaks. What a mission field needs more than anything are just simply missionaries, cover crop disciples that innovate new kingdom works, and then they hold each other together in assembly in the church and they figure out simple forms of church. We're going to leave you with this. We're starting a new national, probably be international, because we have friends around the world, that will just be called Free Market Church. And that's just simply to resource apostolic kingdom ecosystem builders around the world. And we call it Free Market Church. This will just be the last fire hose, okay? That I believe all the functions of ministry of the church should be done for free. And I believe it based on this, is if our country went into another Great Depression, even 2 times worse than the one in the early 20th century, if we were invaded by another country, if the pandemic went 10 years and got 10 times worse, would you believe that God could still build his church? Right? You would, right? And if none of us could get paid for doing any of this, we would still do it, wouldn't we? Okay, so you don't need any money to do church. The gifts of the Spirit were given to us for free. The leadership gifts were given to us for free. The Holy Spirit, the same power that raised Jesus from the dead, has now been given free. Like, you didn't have to pay for that at all. That's a pretty massive power. And then the simple substructures of church, little micro churches where you can meet in your home or in the back room of a bar, wherever it is, underground in a tunnel in China. Those are free structures. It's like you don't literally need any money to do the things and the ways of Jesus. So what that allows you to do then is to take all of your money and resources, your homes, your cars, your expertise, your gifting, all the wealth that you have, and you can create a new market. And what you put your money into, where maybe it used to just be, we just support the pastors of our church. Again, nothing wrong with that. But the book of Acts is a story of consolidating funds, and then remember what they did with it. It says that nobody had any need. The consolidated funds, guys, in the formative book on what a church should do is that the witness of the early church is that, well, you're going to want to get inside that little ecosystem because something's going on in there. And people are not hungry in there, and they got shelter. And it's not just that John, who didn't have a father growing up, has community. He actually has 10 dads now. And they have 14 brothers now. So there's incredible wealth inside this community. So what we do with our money now is that we actually change cities. So we do buy up old buildings, and we start things that the city needs. When people come into Post Commons, sometimes I tell them when they go, well, what do you call this whole thing? I say we're like a neo-Trappist order. Have you ever heard of the Trappists? Another way of saying the Benedictine order, started by Saint Benedict in the 6th century. And those guys, they were cloistered, but unlike the Jesuits or the Franciscans or other orders that would leave cities and go off into the woods, the Trappists were the ones that would go into the main streets of towns, and they would go, what does this town need? And so if you've ever traveled the world, you oftentimes find Trappist beer joints, because in most parts of the world water was unsafe, so you'd die if you drank water. So they were the first kind of beer brewers, and then they'd take all the spent grain and they would make bread, and then everybody would come to them. So they were the first hotels, the first hospitality centers. They became the evangelistic apostolic centers of the world. And so their motto was ora et labora. So every other cloistered order would have a certain motto. Ora et labora meant the prayer is the work, and the work, the actual labor, is the prayer. They were the first ones that said there's no distinction between the sacred and the secular realm. The church was always saying, what we do in here is sacred. What you all are doing is secular. The Benedictines said, no, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. So everywhere we are at, is sacred. If we're plowing the fields with our sons, that's just as spiritual an act as doing a sermon through the book of Romans. And they changed everything. By the time the Reformation happened, people attribute the gospel getting to you and us because during the Reformation time, the Christians of that day had owned about a third of England. It was the Benedictine monks that created so much enterprise, they started to buy up all the land, and it kept the ones that were against the church from taking us out. So they were the first enterprisal order. So when we're thinking about kingdom ecosystem in a mission field, why is business so important? And why is business connected as church? It's that we create a market that doesn't just sustain our missionaries, but it allows us to give all of the goodness of the kingdom away for free to people, and also, therefore, our money and resources and all that we have as a community, it's wealth to you guys, whatever you need. So when people come into our family, if they need shelter, we have it. If they need a dad, we got some of those. If they need a job, we'll create that. We're trying to just create a job for 2 guys this week that came out of the warming center. And one of them has a son that's autistic. And they both have their wits about them. They're just homeless. And they're like, we just need work. So we meet together as a team and we go, all right, we got to make this up. So we look into our economy and we go, okay, well, we're going to start renovating the farm in 2 weeks. So I'm going, I can take a couple of these guys. Well, who's going to pay them? We all throw in money. So we're all giving. It's generosity. And we have other people even outside that go, if you'll give those guys work, I'll throw in some money. So our nonprofit can receive resource. So we're literally making up jobs for you guys so that we can get them into the family. And is that making some sense? Okay, so the church, free, we create a market, but then that whole thing, all of this, when people say, Hugh, so what is church to you? I say, that whole thing is my church. It's my mission. It's the people I pray with. It's the people I study scripture with. The whole thing is church. So if that concept helps, that's kind of maybe an encapsulation of this whole thing. Money still really matters in Jesus' economy, but it's primarily there to bless the world. We always teach the tithe, right? You know that, like we always talk about, like, people will ask, well, how do you make sure there's pure biblical teaching, like when you're decentralizing all this out? And I always remind us, like, I don't know if we have come full face into our teaching over the last 80 years. We just let stuff go like the tithe. We teach, bring your money in, that's biblical, and then we spend 85 to 90% on us. You know, the Old Testament tithe, it was the house would take a 10% rake, 90% out to the city. Acts looks like almost 100% of it out. So we've been not rightly handling the word for a long time. And I grew up in the church, a good Bible teaching church. Nobody ever did one sermon on the kingdom of heaven. So when I heard the term, it meant afterlife. So then that meant evangelism was just try to get people to this thing after they die. So I didn't have to have any relationship with them, so I could just go up to a complete stranger and say, if you died today, where would you go? Well, now when you see the kingdom is at hand, that's a terrible thing to do to people. To just make this thing this afterlife thing, and we don't have to have any relationship with you. In fact, we could be rude to you as long as we're telling you the truth. That's our job. And isn't that what the evangelical church has ended up being to the world? Non-relationship. We'll tell you something we know that you don't. We'll be this self-righteous. There's nothing more off-putting characteristic of a person than self-righteousness, right? And all that means is when you don't think your sins are as bad as somebody else's sins. And here we've been holding our church services week after week, not accurately handling Scripture regarding women in leadership, people that don't hold our orientation sexually, how we handle heaven and hell. You can just go down the host of things that were considered good biblical teaching, and if you dive into them just a little bit, you go, oh, we didn't handle that well. So I think we got to be, this is a little bit of a time, I think, for the church to repent and go, look, we're not sure we're right on that, but we'll at least look into it and pay some attention to it. Yeah. Man, that's a way to end on a downer. Any other kind of final light bulbs? What were you encouraged by today? Where do you feel a little bit lighter? Like you go out here a little bit more excited? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's awesome. Fear is a great indication that you're leaning in. Hopefully you don't stay there, but that's it. It never lifts because God always, it's the dependence thing. Every mission, it should be a big enough vision where you go, oh, I don't think I can do this myself. That's why I didn't want the building, right? So God's like, well, Halter's being kind of a weenie about this. We better help him a little bit and throw him. God will do that to you too. So bring people around yourself. Like I would tell people, especially in business, don't just start a business. Find people that are good at business, and then like just like you would develop yourself to be a doctor or a lawyer, develop yourself in the mission that God's called you to. Like really dive in and do your due diligence, and make sure the mission fits the need of the city. Make sure you got coaching in all those areas that you don't know anything about. There's lots of really good ways to get coaching in business. And lean into the fear a little bit. Any things, other ways that you have been encouraged by?
I was just encouraged by the reality. You acknowledge like the heaviness of doing life on life in ministry, making disciples. But at the same time, I sense a lot of joy, a lot of satisfaction. In fact, you said you're having fun a minute ago.
Yep.
And so to see like the heaviness of it.
And by the way, this is Hugh having fun, okay? So I'm not super expressive, but like this is a smile right here, okay? Cool. Glad you picked up on that. Other things you're encouraged about?
A simple redefinition of some of the APES stuff, specifically the you said like true evangelists are ones with hospitality that are making the space for relationship and conversation. That's really encouraging because I feel this personally, and a lot of people don't feel like they're evangelists, but they are hospitable.
Yeah.
They have people homes all the time, creating those places
Yeah.
for other people. Seeing that.
Just talking, can you hear that? Just saying, just the kind of a retake on evangelism. Been helpful. By the way, most of the people that have come to faith in our world, 2 to 5 year stories. So I want you to hear that as far as like the length of time. And I love that because I feel like that might sound slow, but that's a lot of people still in the course of your life. And again, when they come to faith, now you have to manage their spiritual growth. So trust me, you don't want a lot of people. a lot, I mean, that's a good pace, and you can have a good family life and a good personal life, and still see some fun stuff happen with some folks. But that's even when you have the ecosystem working, it still takes, people are really off-put by our movement right now. And so it gets to where we find that they finally cross the spiritual rebirth line when they've fallen in love with the community, not the individual person. So it might only take 6 months for somebody to go, well, I like Hugh and Cheryl and their whole family. It's when they've been around our community and they start going, man, I love all of these. Like, and now people talk about us like that. They say, we've heard about your community. That's when you'll start to see them go, I think I'm ready to transfer my life into a new community, which is the biblical picture of conversion. When people were crossing over, they were literally leaving their families to join the new family. That's why I think the writers of the New Testament talked about it as a new family. Other encouragements? Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, and when you hear somebody emotional because of the pain of feeling held back by ecclesial forms, you can know every single time something of the Jesus story got misinterpreted. Okay? Because right now, just think practically, out of all the needs that are going on in the world, do you really think Jesus thinks he can do it with men only? Of course not. Okay? This is when he gives his essence of himself, he was giving it to the whole body. In this family, there's now neither, male, female, Jew, Gentile, barbarian, Scythian, slave, free. This stuff is for the whole enchilada. So how that works out in polity, you'll find that in kingdom ecosystems, you run into way less problems because it's not hierarchical. It's based on centric leadership. So every one of these is their own center. They have their own leaders. And the leaders become natural leaders. So this is Taylor and Lindsay. This is Hugh and Cheryl. Okay? So this is not based on some of the same polity issues. Wide open, guys. It literally is wide open. So, all right. Enough said. I'm so sick of myself. Thank you guys for today.
Maybe. Thank you for spending the day here with us. Cold February day. Hopefully warmer days are on the way. I'm just going to pray us out, and thank you again for being here with us. Father, thank you for Hugh. Thank you for his life and his experience and the things that he and his family and his broader family are doing, not just for the city of Alton, but coming here and stirring our imaginations and stirring our inspiration for how to be better missionaries. Father, I pray that you would do that work in us as we leave here today, that you would just refresh in us our identity as your missionaries. We're representing many cities in this room, and so I pray that you would give us a heart for those cities and for those neighborhoods that you have strategically placed us. Give us a missional innovation, whether that is in our current places of work and areas of expertise, or if that's branching out and pursuing something different and creating something different. Give us more of you to be able to do those things and enjoy you more through it, and see more people come to faith and relationship with you through those things. Father, we thank you. I pray that you would be with all of these people as they drive home today, bring safety and joy to them as they go. It's in the name of your Son, Jesus, we pray. Amen.